Welcome to the Higher Education Job Search. This is part 2, Understanding the Hiring Process. And my name is Suzanne Grossman, Deputy Director of Career Services and Alumni Relations from the Marxe School of Public and International Affairs at Baruch College. In the first part, I covered more of setting the groundwork for a staff role in higher education. This presentation does not focus on faculty roles, but more staff roles. So setting the stage, networking, understanding your targets, understanding the functional area of interest, and professional associations and how important they are. So for this, we're going to talk about understanding once you're a little bit further along and you're starting to get interviews. So we'll jump right in with the process. I'm also going to cover the CUNY system a bit for those who may be interested in that, in part because I know that fairly well, and I think from the outside that can be a confusing process or opaque. So every school is slightly different. And as you're talking to people, doing your networking, this is an important question to ask, just to understand so that when you go into the interview, you know what to expect. Sometimes there is a phone interview, sometimes not. Often there is a panel interview with multiple staff members. That's very common in higher education, some kind of search committee, or at the very least, multiple people interviewing you at the same time. And it's usually not a fast process because there's multiple rounds. So you might come in once and then you come back. And it might vary who's looking at the resumes. This is the case in CUNY, who's looking at the resumes first. So this is where it's really important as you're doing networking in target schools to ask this question. It just can be helpful so that you're mentally prepared as you go into the process. And to go into a little bit about the CUNY process, which is one of the largest employers in New York City. I think there's 24 total schools, and it employs thousands and thousands of people. The jobs are posted on the main CUNY website. There are also lesser known jobs from a different pool of funding called the Research Foundation, and you see the URL here, and that is where there might be an external source of funding outside of New York State funding these jobs. So these are real jobs in CUNY. They're slightly different in terms of the benefits and the structure. Sometimes they have limited terms of 2 years or something like that. So you have to study the posting closely, but you might have a little bit less competition for these jobs because it's off of the it's removed from the main CUNY job website. One thing to know about CUNY jobs in general, there's a hard deadline. Resumes are not reviewed before this, so resumes are all reviewed after the deadline. You cannot apply after that deadline. At the same time, if a job just gets posted and it's up for 3 or 4 weeks, which is the average, you also don't have to rush and submit it the very next day. You can take your time, perhaps try to talk to people about that job in order to better customize your cover letter, which is important for this process. So just something to know in terms of the deadlines. Sometimes it'll say rolling, in which case that's a little bit different, but usually it'll tell you when the resumes will start to be reviewed. In the CUNY process, there is a committee, usually made up of 3 to 4 people, and they're only going to bring in 7, maybe 10 people. 10 is even on the high side. And they will do the first round. They're the first ones to review the resumes, and then they'll pass on 3 or 4, maybe 5 finalists to the actual hiring manager or boss of the job. So your first step is to make it through the committee, and the committee and the hiring manager do not generally speak to each other. That's part of the rules. So when you're trying to network and influence the process, you may want to ask questions like, do you know who's on the search committee? Because if you only know the hiring manager may say, that's great, if they make it past the committee, I'll certainly consider them. So just something to keep in mind. You do want to customize every application for the specific job. Make sure to include a cover letter. Some people apply and they don't include a cover letter. And so the cover letter does matter, and I think this is true not just in CUNY, but in higher ed in general. People want to see what you are saying about their school, why you want to work in this particular role. And you're going to compete against other people who have done that. And if you haven't done that, that puts you at a disadvantage. In CUNY, submit your application in PDF or Word. There is a text-only option. I wouldn't recommend that. And I would guess this is the same in other schools too. Don't do the text-only option unless that's your only option. Another point about CUNY is that you can find the salary schedules. It is unionized at the for the state lines, and so here's the link on the union website. And sometimes the salaries are in the job description, but sometimes they're not. So you want to look at the HEO, or Higher Education Officer, classification for that job and find the corresponding salary in the last column, which right now is 2017. That will change hopefully soon with a new contract. But this will give you a sense of what are the ranges, and you would know that whatever salary for this position, it's going to come from one of those numbers. And then you'd also get a sense of what your increases would be from year to year. So in terms of interviews generally, speaking for any institution, possibilities could include scenario questions, questions where they say a student comes in, this happens, how would you handle that? And I would think for a question like that, you want to have an example, if you can, of when that something similar happened for you. This is where in your prep, you want to have as many examples as possible at your fingertips that could apply to various scenarios. There could be behavioral questions, and those are just the kind that are, tell me about a time when you, tell me about a leadership, when you took leadership or initiative or faced a challenging situation. There might be questions around their particular student body. So is it a private university? Is it a public university? Do they have a large number of business students, a large number of pre-med students? And they might ask you a question about your familiarity with that. Sometimes there are questions around diversity and your cultural competency, working with different individuals and students. There might be a challenging situation question and how you would handle it. For certain roles, they may ask you to do a brief 10-minute presentation and give you instructions about that. I know I've had that in various scenarios in career services. So if there's public speaking involved in a role, that might be part of the interview process. And at the end of the interview, you want to be able to ask thoughtful questions. And I like questions that are about the actual job. I think keep in mind in a 45-minute or 20-minute interview, they're only going to scratch the surface about what's involved with the job. And so there's so much more they could say about it. And that's where if you ask actual questions about the job itself, about the student body, understanding students better, what are some of the goals of the job or the department, what's on their wish list, and what are some of the challenges that they face and that they'd hope that this person would support. Don't be discouraged by internal candidates. It's very common in higher education. There's an internal candidate who is either not in a permanent line and needs to apply for their own job. This happens a lot in CUNY. Or someone else at the college is already working in another department. Maybe they're already known on the inside. And so you have to keep going regardless of this and see every interview as an opportunity to impress people and get good practice, and also understand that a no right now is not a no forever. I've been in an interview where so the next point is around asking for feedback. I asked for feedback and found out there was an internal candidate, but they really liked me and said to stay in touch, and sure enough, I was hired 6 months later for a different role. So you have to kind of go in with that mindset. You can ask for feedback. I would only say to do that over the phone, not over email. And that's because people don't want to put things in writing. And it actually requires more thought to put something in writing versus a quick phone call. So ask for a 5 or 10 minute phone call to get some feedback saying you were excited about the role. You want to make sure you're presenting yourself in the best possible way for future opportunities. And then use that as a way to forge a little bit of a stronger connection and keeping in touch with that person. Lots of people do not do this, and if you do this, again, this can open more doors for the future. Sometimes people are trying to transition to higher education, but they don't want to go into an entry-level role, which is understandable. So make sure you do your informational interviews and understand, do you need to go down a few levels from where you are to go up more quickly? Your competition is going to be people already in higher ed looking to move up or change roles. And again, it's not impossible, but just you have to understand what you're up against. You want to highlight your most relevant experience prominently, even if it was not the main part of your job. So if there's something where you connected with college students or higher ed in some way, or just something that was a transferable skill, events or financial aid or whatever it is, make sure that's appearing to the top. Don't make people work so hard to figure out what's transferable. Use networking to understand the role and get a foot in the door. There are some jobs that prefer outside candidates, especially in career services, law schools, and business schools. They might want that inside employer knowledge. So, don't forget that and use that to your advantage. And if you're very overqualified for a role, you might need to put a line in your cover letter about why this particular role. And keep in mind, nobody wants to hire somebody who is going to be unhappy right away because it's not the right level. And so trying to explain that might be helpful. Sometimes you can volunteer to get that experience you might be missing, and you'd be surprised that this might be easier than you think to do. If you're lacking a functional area, that's your area of interest. So often alumni relations needs events. It could be your own school, or it could be a school you are interested in, and you can volunteer, you can mentor students. A lot of career centers are very busy and could use an extra hand with resume reviews or mock interviews. Admissions departments often need alumni to come back. You can offer to lead a workshop on an area of expertise. And I've seen this happen where people turn volunteering into full-time jobs, or they use it as a way to just get known, because that's also what you're up against, is people who are kind of already known to others when that job actually opens up. And hopefully this is obvious, but I wanted to underscore some points around your application. It really has to be very strong, very thoughtful. You have to answer the question, why them, on your letter, in addition to why you. So people want to hire people who want to work at their school. And customize your resume too, not just your cover letter. Quantify, focus on accomplishments on your resume and potentially in your cover letter. And if you were referred by a specific person, mention that in the cover letter with their permission, if that makes sense. So these applications that you submit, you need to do quality applications, which might take a little bit of time, but that's going to make a difference in addition to networking. Persistence is a very important part of the process. For some people, they may get lucky. For others, it could take some time. And so part of it is just be persistent, be in it for the long haul. A relationship you cultivate now could lead to something 2 or 3 years from now. I know that was true for myself in some positions that I've had where I was planting a lot of seeds that didn't really come to fruition for quite a while, but then they did. So just think about if you're truly committed to this field. Any networking that you do might not have an immediate payoff, but will be good down the line. And for students in our program or alumni, you can feel free to use Marxe Career Services for support and introductions to alumni. And you can do it. A new job is around every corner, and higher education is a great place to work, and I wish everyone lots of luck as you go forward with this process. Thank you.